Greetings, I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to show you how I painted these Panzer 38Ts. I've done these to what I would consider a tabletop standard, maybe slightly above that, I don't know. What I'm trying to say is that I wasn't going for a complex paint scheme or any extreme weathering or anything like that. I just wanted something relatively quick and simple to paint up for the gaming table. Anyway, these are 15mm or 1/100th scale Panzer 38Ts from the Plastic Soldier Company. I built these many years ago, but I did make a video, and if you would like to see it, there's a link in the description. Be warned though, it is pretty old. It also covers the Marder variants that you can make with that box. However, I haven't painted those in this video, or at all yet. So I guess we'll get to it then. I primed these Panzer 38Ts in black, which seemed like a good idea when painting dark colours. Then I airbrushed on a base coat of Vallejo model colour German grey. It's very German, so it works quite well on German tanks. I do this in a couple of thin layers. Better to build up the opacity with a couple of layers than to dump it all on there in one thick detail obscuring coat. This is pretty simple. After all, it's just spraying the entire model with one colour, and it's pretty hard to mess that up. I mean, it can be done, but don't. Then I airbrush a highlight from above, directly down onto the top of the turret, and also the hull. Can't forget the hull. You can see the difference here. Even though it is fairly subtle, the difference is there. This was a mix of roughly 1/4 model colour pale grey blue, mixed with 3/4 German grey. Then I applied a dry brushing of straight pale grey blue. This is way lighter than the base colours, and at this point it does look a bit extreme, but come with me on this adventure. I'm pretty much just dry brushing this all over the model. The rivets, corners and raised detail parts are all fairly prominent, and catch the paint quite nicely. Next to a model with none of the dry brushing yet applied, the effect is really quite stark. It's not going to stay that way though. Obviously the same treatment is given to the turrets, otherwise they won't match, and that would be silly, wouldn't it? The dry brush I'm using here, which is a makeup brush, is clearly quite large compared to such a tiny model. I did use a smaller dry brush to get the areas the bigger one wouldn't reach, though I didn't manage to film that, owing to being a numpty. Now it's time for a wash. This is army painted dark tone, which has been thinned roughly 3 parts dark tone to 2 parts water, so it is fairly heavy. As I presume you can see, I'm applying this all over the model. I try not to apply it too heavily, and avoid having it pool up anywhere on the tank. I'm just trying to get a nice, relatively even coverage. I think it ended up looking quite good. The highlights are still a little bit stark though. Before I do anything about that, I applied gloss varnish and then decals. Very smart Herbert didn't film that, but it's pretty simple anyway. I used Plastic Soldier Company decals, and only on the turrets. It's simple, but I believe it's plausible looking. I would have actually preferred red numbers, but I didn't have enough of them. Anyway, after that I applied a wash of Army Painter Light Tone, which was thinned roughly 1 part light tone to 2 parts water. As you can see, I'm applying this wash in pretty much the same way as the previous one, painting it all over the tank. It's probably not going to show up super well over the dark areas, but on the edges where I've got those highlights, and over the decals, it should create a slightly dirty look. I decided not to do any chipping. It's kind of hard to get a good chipping colour on a dark tank like this, in such a small scale, and have it stand out and not look weird. In my head, that just means these tanks are relatively new and well looked after. Moving on, it's now time to bring out some of those details, starting with the stowage. I painted these boxes using Vallejo model colour German camouflage medium brown, because why not? Your Panzer 38T might not have these boxes, and if that's the case, don't worry about painting them. This is of course fairly simple. Just try to avoid getting the brown onto the hull, and build up the colour with a couple of coats. As the kids these days are so fond of saying, thin your paints. I give the boxes a highlight with model colour brown sand. Again, no real reason for this choice, I just thought it would look good. You can see that I'm using an appropriately small dry brush here. This is a former regular paintbrush that's had a very rough life. It does the job quite well though. In this shot you can see that the light tone wash has made the grey look far more interesting and dirty, and I'm very happy with that. Next I painted the mufflers with model colour Mahogany Brown. These are huge and you can't miss them. That said, this is still a small model and I do my best not to put this colour on the grey hull. Of course it is possible to paint over mistakes, but it does save time to not make the mistakes in the beginning, if possible. It's not too hard anyway. The result does stand out a bit, but as before, we can take care of that with some washes and such. Before I get to that though, I took Vallejo model colour Gunmetal Grey and painted the towing cables here, which were an optional part, so maybe your Panzer doesn't have them. Not all of mine do, in fact I do kind of wish I'd left them off of all of mine. I'm not super happy with how the part looks. Anyway, I painted the cable part and pick head with the gunmetal, as well as the rest of the tool heads, being a hammer on the left and an axe on the right, for when your tank's friend is in need, they can offer my axe. I also paint the machine gun. The result is a bit shinier than I think is appropriate, but like I keep saying, washes can change this later on. Also, don't forget to paint the turret machine guns. That way they can be nice and consistent with the whole machine guns, and who doesn't like consistency in their machine guns? Then, because it makes at least some sense, I painted the handles on the tools. For this I used Vallejo model colour Beige Brown. It's probably kind of obvious that care should be taken when painting tiny parts like these. They are kind of chunky for this scale, but it's still pretty easy to get the paint where you don't want it. Like I said before, it's okay if you do make mistakes, but it saves time if you don't. As you can probably see, I haven't done the neatest job here myself, so I'll be doing some correcting after this. I wasn't really sure if the long rod on the left side of the tank should be wood or metal, but I've painted it wood, so now it's wood. If this is incorrect and upsets you, please bottle your tears and send them to my PO box. After I made my corrections, it's time for washes. I used undiluted army painted dark tone on the guns, cables and tool heads. I am trying to be fairly neat with this. I'm trying to only apply it to the parts I want it on, but it will seep around the edges too, which is fine and should help create a sort of shadow. I thinned the dark tone down roughly 2 parts dark tone to 1 part water, and applied it to the mufflers, just to darken them down and give them a bit of a colour variation. I followed that with a wash of strong tone, which was thinned roughly 2 parts strong tone to 1 part water. I apply this on the wooden parts, so tool handles, and if your Panzer 38T has them, stowage boxes. Clearly mine have stowage boxes, so I apply this wash to them. I am satisfied with the result, though I did quite like the boxes before the wash too. Then I figured it's probably not such a bad idea to paint the tyres on the road wheels. It probably won't surprise anybody that I've chosen to use AK Interactive rubber tyres for this. It's really quite hard to see against the base grey colour, but it is different and it is there. I figured that was enough for the acrylics, and I applied a nice coat of gloss varnish to protect them from the enamels, which come next. I was pretty happy with how the models looked at this point, and I didn't really want to needlessly add more just for the sake of adding more. What I did add though was some AK Interactive track wash. On the tracks, would you believe? You would? I thought you might. Both the tracks currently in use on the tank, and of course the spare track links. If your Panzer 38T doesn't have spare track links, again, don't worry about painting them. I paint them all the same way, trying to be careful not to paint the parts I wanted to stay grey, though it is very easy to remove errant colours when working with enamels, so there's no need to panic if you make a mistake. I mean, you can panic if you want, you do you, just there's no need for it. It's entirely voluntary. You can see there's quite a difference between the tank with and without this track wash. I also applied this to the mufflers because why not? I think it helps to make them look a bit more rusty. The result I've got here isn't too bad, and I didn't really want to add any further enamel weathering. I'm pretty happy with the way the grey was looking just from the acrylic washes, so I will leave it there. Well, not really, I applied some AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish, and then I left it there. That's the Plastic Soldier Company Panzer 38T in 15mm scale painted in a nice dark grey. I'm pretty happy with this. It's not like a super fancy, extremely weathered paint job or anything like that. This is really more of a relatively quick and simple-ish tabletop paint job. You could of course go much simpler, or far more complex if you wanted, but this is pretty much what I set out to do. I rather like doing grey German vehicles in a fairly dark colour. There's always the debate if that's correct or not. I don't care though, it's how I like it. I'm not here to please rivet counters with my painting after all. Nor my markings. I did look at some examples of the Panzer 38T, and I did see some with numbers on the sides of the turret, which I quite liked, though as I said before, I would have preferred them in red. I just didn't have enough red numbers that were suitable. I used the cross on the back of the turret because why not? I couldn't find a space that was large enough and not filled with detail or stowage to add any to the hull, but I think it looks fine that way anyway. I think if I had to change anything, I might have omitted that wash on the stowage boxes, though I'm still happy with how they look. So, not the most complicated paint job ever, it doesn't need to be. It looks the part, and I think it would look great on a table with some nice terrain, which I don't have, but if I did, it would look nice. For those interested, a list of the colours I've used will be in the description below. As always, I'm only showing you what I did. Feel free to use whatever colours you like. I'm not the boss of you. And if you have some of these tanks painted up, maybe you would like to show us on Discord. It's free and easy to use, so why not? We would love to see your work. Anyway, what do you think? Too simple? Not simple enough? I mean, I'm not going to repaint them or anything, but it is interesting to see what people think. If this video has been helpful or interesting to you, I would certainly appreciate it if you were to share it with your friends or anybody you feel might get some value out of it. Also, if you've not done so already, feel free to subscribe, follow, become a member or patron, and all of the other things you do on YouTube and social media. Links to all of my things are in the description, and, as always, I shall return soon. So, until then, be excellent to each other, and thank you for watching. Farewell.